Guru Nation, welcome to episode 170 of Random Musings from the Clinical Trials Guru. The 160s were incredibly long, probably had a lot to do with my vacation I took, but also, um, even before my vacation, just a lot of stuff I was working on. But anyways, this is episode 170. Episode 169, which I did yesterday, already got so many comments, so much feedback that I decided to focus episode 170 on answering some of those questions pertaining to primarily risk-based monitoring and how we are in a transition period for CRAs, at least in my opinion, but also the opinion of many others, much more intelligent people than I am, much more experienced people than I, much higher up than I, much more industry insiders than I. They share the same, or at least similar, sentiments, which is the CRA position is changing, it's evolving. Whether that's good or bad depends on your perspective, and it depends on on where you fit in. Are you already a CRA? Are you someone that wants to be a CRA? Quality of life. Do you value quality of life and or job security over higher salary? These are some of the things that only you can answer. These vary differently from person to person, and even with the same person at different points in their career. So there's a lot. There's a lot to unpack here. I'm just gonna go through some of the questions, but let me set the stage for those that didn't listen or didn't watch episode 169. So we titled it. Chris and I, Chris Sauber, my business partner, he joined me for that one. The writing is on the wall for clinical research associates, and why entry level is great right now. And it scared a lot of people. Like it gave a lot of people hope, a lot of optimism for entry level people. You know, it should be easier. It doesn't mean you're entitled to a position if you're entry level. And by the way, these things that we're talking about, these transitions, take decades to manifest themselves. And we are in a transition period, which started really in 2015, but more so in 2016 with risk based monitoring. And that's going to last till at least 2025, 2026, by my theory of in this industry, paradigm shifts take about a decade to manifest themselves. It's kind of what it took with EDC. When I started in the industry with electronic trial data capture, we were still using paper based CRFs when I first started in 2005. But then immediately, 2006, there was a transition period, and I think I came in on the tail end of the transition period where there were still some paper CRF charts, but the majority, more than 51% of the studies were starting to use EDC. And fast forward 10 years later to 2015, almost 100% of the studies are using EDC. You almost don't even hear about paper CRFs unless they're small investigator initiated trials. I also hear from my colleagues in Europe that in Europe they still use a lot of paper based CRFs. Not sure why. Not even sure if that's true. Maybe it was just this one person's experience. So, RBM, risk based monitoring, the white paper started coming out 2013, 2014, 2015. It's going to take a decade to implement and manifest, and then it's going to become a household name, right? Risk based monitoring. We're not even going to think of how we used to do studies before with 100% source data verification. Um, so let's get into some of these questions because a lot of the existing CRAs are getting worried. In fact, what inspired episode 169 yesterday was a CRA. We've got a lot of clients for our consulting company where we help people start sites, we help people open clinics, we help existing clinics get studies, we help existing clinics negotiate their budgets. Basically, everything that needs to be done to have a successful research site, we help clients with for 1,000 a month. Lately, a lot of our clients have been CRAs that are either stressed out and fed up with their jobs, or they're a little concerned about how they're being phased out, or potentially being phased out because nobody knows yet. I don't think there's a giant conspiracy out there to keep this a secret and then just all of a sudden phase out all the CRAs. I don't think that's what's going on. I think the industry is always looking, the CRO sector is always looking to win bids, obviously, from pharma, right? So all these things come from pharma, and pharma reacts to what FDA mandates. And a lot of these changes came after the 2016 GCP revisions from the FDA, which basically told pharma companies that they've got to take full responsibility for the conduct of their studies and not just leave it up to the CROs. And when there's findings or anything similar to that, the sponsors can just point the finger at the CRO. Well, the FDA said that's not allowed anymore. Sponsors, you still can use CROs, and most still do, but you have to be more involved. You have to know what's going on. Just like PIs. PIs can outsource the work for their protocols to coordinators and to other staff members, but at the end of the day, it's their responsibility. All of it is their responsibility. So same thing with the sponsors. So I don't think there's a big conspiracy. I just think it's pharma adjusting to regulations, CROs adjusting to the needs of sponsors, and then obviously that affects the CRAs and the sites to some extent, but in this case, mostly the CRAs. So I set it up. I set up the table for you. That's a Cliff Notes version of episode 169, with the punchline being, and again, it's just a theory, if CRAs are going to be required to do less going forward, because one of the benefits of risk-based monitoring is not having to do 100% source data review and 100% source data verification, well, if you're going to supplement the CRA with two, three, or four other personnel, like data managers, data assistants, clinical trial assistants, just different people, surround the one CRA with three or four different people doing different things, which I don't even know. It's not even clear what those things are going to be. That's something we got to figure out. But the theory is, and it makes sense, it makes logical sense, that we won't need to pay CRAs as much as we do now. And also, CROs are going to spin it as we're trying to improve quality of life for CRAs, because one of the biggest complaints and the biggest causes of stress for CRAs is the fact that their quality of life is ridiculously low. Um, these are people that are out of the house 20 days out of the 30 days every month. Like, they're on site 15 of those days, right? And they're traveling those other days. It's ridiculous numbers. So if that's reduced to maybe 10, well, the job becomes a little easier, a little more, actually a lot more quality of life. You don't need to pay the CRAs as much. Again, this is not written in stone. This is just one person's thoughts and random musings on this topic, but many others share it with me. So it'd be interesting. It was definitely interesting reading everyone's comments. So let's go through some of these from the yesterday's video and episode. So the first one. This one, these people are, this one in particular, getting fearful. Well, let's start with the first one, ECRG. He's a industry insider, works for a CRO, so he understands the inner workings and the dynamics of CRO life. Okay. He said one of the reasons it's going to take so long for this change to happen, meaning CRA's jobs will be drastically different, which I think is going to start around 2025 and fully manifest itself around 2026, is studies take so many years to complete, which is true, and that's not going to change, at least as of this podcast, episode 170, July 18th, 2018. Halfway point of the year. Can you believe that? Are you halfway? Are your goals that you set out in January for yourself halfway accomplished? If not, got a lot of work to do. You're behind schedule. All right. I think I am behind schedule myself. The year started off super busy, and then it was just a matter of responding to all those inbound inquiries, and really taught me a lot about organization and delegation, and we'll get there. This is a good year for the research industry. So studies take so many years to complete. If the study starts out with traditional monitoring, it's very hard to change that mid-study, if at all. This is correct. We have to wait for the studies to finish, and some of these phase 3 studies go on for 5 years, right? Now we'll see what the Trump administration does with Gottlieb. It's very um, they're trying to have less regulations in place, so they're trying to make it quicker. There's even some radical ideas about getting rid of clinical research totally, completely. That's if I was a gambling man, which sometimes I am, I would put a significant amount of my money on that not happening. Um, so, yes, it's going to take a decade for this to fully manifest itself, if it does. It may not. If it does, which is certainly the trajectory that we're headed on, it will take at least a decade for this to manifest itself. So, ECRG, shout out to you. Go subscribe to his channel. It's pretty interesting. Another person. It doesn't seem the CRA role has longevity, especially for study coordinators like myself. So, is it worth getting into the industry? Well, if you're a coordinator, which you already are in the industry. Newsflash, you're in the industry. Okay? Now, so far, technology, big data, AI, has not found a way to automate or make a study coordinator's job any easier. As a matter of fact, you can make the argument that these technologies that are supposed to make the CRA's job easier are making the study coordinator's job more difficult. So, if anything, if you follow this logic, which again is just my opinion, okay, this is not a rule, this is not set in stone, it would make sense that coordinators would start getting paid more because their jobs are going to get more complicated. I mean, there's a lot, I see it at my sites with the remote monitoring. It sounds easy on paper, right? Yes, we have less monitoring visits on site. Well, the opportunity cost is now they're calling us all the time, asking us to scan documents. Now I need to hire a new person just to scan and upload and follow up with inquiries from the CRAs and their assistants, these 3 or 4 other people surrounding the CRA that are requesting things constantly from the site because they're adjusting to this new paradigm of monitoring and SDV and SDR. So I don't want to, as a site owner, I don't want to put my coordinator on that. So I have to hire a new person for this. Or if I do put my coordinator on it, I have to pay them more because they're not going to like it. They're getting more work for the same pay. It doesn't make sense. They're not going to stick. Nobody in their right mind would stay for that, right? So, some way, shape, or form, I've got to pay for that. That's an opportunity cost for me as a site owner. So, you are already in the industry. I think you've got 10 years to milk this CRA high salary, um, I guess, standard. CRAs make the most out of anyone in the industry, I think, other than maybe PIs. Sometimes PIs don't make anything. It depends on their deal with the site that they're working with. So CRAs consistently the highest salaries. Forbes always has it as a top 10 career, top 10 salary, top 10 job security. Like it's a great job. So that's not going anywhere in the next decade. So there's no reason to not if your goal was to be a CRA prior to listening to episode 169, you should continue to pursue that goal. You can always go back to being a coordinator. Let's say 2 years from now, they wiped out the CRA position. Again, not going to happen, but let's just worst case scenario. You're a coordinator now. You get hired as a CRA tomorrow, and 2 years from tomorrow, the industry gets rid of CRAs. Okay, they have robots doing it now. you can go back to being a coordinator. Chances are those coordinators are going to have a lot more work to do because it's we haven't found a way to automate or have an algorithm perform a coordinator's job. We've starting to find ways on SDR and SDV and how to automate that a little bit. And at least there's a roadmap, at least in abstract terms, and on a macro scale of how SDV and SDR is going to be evolving over the next decade. But coordinator, I think that's a lot more complicated because now you're dealing with patient interactions, which are not repetitive tasks. Like every patient visit is different because every human being is different. So they may have a AE, this other patient may not have an AE, this patient may be on placebo, this one's not, this one's not doing well, this one is. So all kind of stuff. This patient doesn't want to doesn't want to stay in the study anymore. These new ones keep wanting to get into another study. Coordinator's role is going to be extremely hard to outsource to an algorithm. So even if and the jobs are getting harder, so there's going to be a shortage of coordinators. There already is a shortage of coordinators. So if their jobs are getting harder, there's going to be an even greater shortage of coordinators out there. So you can always go back to being a coordinator. So I wouldn't worry about that. I would, if your goal is to be a CRA, do it, milk it for the next decade. Who knows what's going to happen after that next decade, but that's like 1/8 of your life. If you live to be 80, 10 years is 16% of your life. I mean, it's not chump change. Like, it's a significant amount of your time that your job is still going to be safe. Okay? Um, and maybe even getting easier. And they're still earning significantly more than the average coordinator. So, just something to think about. Don't be negative. Always look for the positive and the optimistic um, ideals. Okay. Next question. The gum. Please don't chew gum. I know. I watched that podcast, watched the video, listened to the podcast. I realized I'm chewing gum. I almost disliked my own video. I didn't do that. But I'm sure others will, and I'm sorry. I will try not to chew gum. I'm not chewing gum now, so I'll try. Can't promise it won't happen again, though. Another one, another negative Nancy. I'm nervous now watching this. I'm just now getting into this industry by going back for school to get a bachelor's in clinical trials. Am I going to regret this? Will this industry change too much? Again, very similar to the previous question. If this is something you want to do, this is still, look, AI, right? Technology, big data. It's changing every single industry. Some of them violently, some of them drastically, and some of them like immediately. I mean, I went to McDonald's. I was in Spain, and they have more people ordering at the automated kiosks than they do waiting in line to order from a human being. Like these are radically disruptive technologies. In clinical research, things move at an extremely slow pace compared to most other industries. So you have a moat, okay? You have a safety net there. You can see if you're paying attention, which you should always pay attention to what's going on in the world and to trends in technology. I mean, if you don't know about blockchain, you need to get into that. I don't You don't have to buy Bitcoin, you don't have to invest in cryptocurrency, but learn about blockchain because that's coming next and that's going to be as wild and as important of a paradigm shift as the internet itself was. In fact, many people are calling blockchain the next internet, internet 3.0 or 4.0. I can't imagine. I can't remember which number we're on, but internet 4.0, like totally different type. Like that's going to affect clinical research. That's going to affect every industry. That's going to affect our lives. It's going to affect the world. So pay attention to what's going on outside of the industry. If clinical research is really something that you wanted to get into prior to listening to episode 169, it should continue to be something you're interested in after episode 169, unless something changes with you up here or here in your heart. Okay, if that changes, it's different. But don't let some random guy on YouTube scare you out of pursuing your dreams, because this is a fantastic industry. I'm not bailing out, not going anywhere. Where am I going to go? Right? So, this is a great industry to be in. Continue, in my opinion, unless you realize you don't like clinical research, because what you're learning in okay, you have a background as a research assistant and you work in pharma manufacturing. So clinical research is different than pharma manufacturing. It depends who you work for in clinical research. If you work for a research site, which is what I recommend anyone do, work as a study coordinator before you start applying to be a CRA. Do that. It's going to give you a tremendous perspective on the industry. As a coordinator, because you're dealing with patients, you're dealing with PIs, you're dealing with CRAs, you're dealing with sponsors, you're dealing with everybody as a coordinator. Whereas some of the other roles in this industry, like a CRA for example, you're not dealing with patients and you're not dealing necessarily with sponsors. Okay. Sometimes you interact with them, but usually it's your lead CRA or your project manager. So you're very much siloed in your little bubble and you don't get to interact with other aspects of the industry. But as a coordinator, you're interacting with everyone. So don't be scared about this. All right. Don't be nervous. Don't be scared. Here's a good one. How can I see? And this one I don't have an answer for, but it's a good thought experiment for all of us listening and watching. So, how can a CRA provide more value in the future with this approach? Seems like a waste of a diverse skill set. Perhaps this opens many doors for CRAs to spend their newfound time on improving other aspects of trial management. What would you do as a CRA if you spent less time traveling to sites? And the answer is I don't know. Okay, I am not sure what you would do. I've only been a CRA myself for wow, it's almost been 3 years now as a CRA. So I don't know. The CRO that I'm contracted with, it's traditional monitoring. I'm doing 100% SDV. I only know about risk-based monitoring from interacting with people from CROs, not through my CRA position, but through this platform and interviewing people and going to conferences here and there and talking to my monitors that come to my sites who are dealing with risk-based monitoring, and then responding to you guys and gals who reach out to me every day and tell you educate me on risk-based monitoring and how that the practical implications of what RBM is doing to your job as a CRA, like the person who inspired episode 169. So I'm not sure what a CRA would do other than you better learn how to solve problems, and all of them, and you better figure out ways to not rely on your lead CRA and to not rely on your project manager to bail you out of every situation. Like, you better learn how to problem solve yourself and problem solve correctly. Don't choose the wrong option when you're faced with a number of options to solve a problem. Like and I know it's vague. I don't know. I really don't know. I'm just commenting on what's going on. I don't know the practical implications of what a CRA can actually do other than get your sites to perform better work. I mean, I don't know. Like proactive, maybe recruitment. Recruitment's an issue. I don't know how a CRA can really help with that. Keeping queries down, keeping the site metrics up, like all the KPIs, key performance indicators that sponsors and CROs grade sites on. They're also grading you, the CRA. So if you're a CRA and your sites consistently underperform on these metrics, either you're a very unlucky CRA that gets assigned the worst sites all the time, or you have something to do with it, right? So that's my answer to that is I don't know, other than find a way to problem solve and get your sites to improve their metrics. Sounds extremely easy. Uh, with my limited experience, it's extremely challenging. Here's another one. This is a long one. We might end it on this one. Hey Dan, sorry for the newbie questions. This risk-based monitoring thing is really unfathomable to me, and I am really curious to know about it. I have spent 1 year in clinical operations as a traditional CRA. Now I am in data management. If risk-based monitoring algorithms are consuming data predominantly from EDC and not sure what other vendors, to identify risks so that it can tell the CRA which site and which subject and which visits to focus on. How do the CRO sponsor we establish the veracity and authenticity of the data that is entered into the EDC systems by the site if it is not accurate or not, and the source data maintained as per Alcoa? We used to do 100% SDR and SDV and IP accountability for all subjects, so now risk-based monitoring aims to minimize the CRA monitoring visits to the site by relying on algorithms. I'm perplexed. How do we identify whether data entered and patients enrolled in sites are not fictitious, whether consenting is done properly? So let's stop there. Let's get into fraud a little bit. I think, and there's been many white papers written on this, fraud is going to be, and already is, more readily detected by algorithms than by humans. Okay, you can read. There's tons of articles written on this, white papers. If big data does anything well in this industry, it's detecting fraud. So one of the things that very small minority of people that conduct clinical research who engage in fraud do is they tend to use favorite numbers. Okay, they get lazy and they get sloppy basically, and sometimes to a tired CRA or even an awake CRA, that's not readily apparent. But to an algorithm that's modeled and designed in part to scope those kind of things out, it becomes really clear. So don't take my word for it. Go read the articles on this. There's been white papers written about this. The first one I remember reading was in 2016, 2015, about fraud and about big data and how even back then it was already detecting easily these kind of things. So I think that's the point of RBM is you no longer have to worry about fraud. Okay, the machines do that better than the CRAs, supposedly. Okay, so that should answer your question there. Um, the informed consents. Okay, as far as I'm concerned, the ICF should always be reviewed 100% by the CRAs, but the ICF is not a visit. So just because you're reviewing the ICF, 100% of the ICFs, doesn't mean you have to review 100% of the data for every visit for every subject. Okay? You could put a priority on the ICFs. 100% of the informed consents need to be reviewed. I don't think RBM is looking to replace CRAs from reviewing every single informed consent. Matter of fact, in my monitoring reports, and I've worked for 3 CROs, 4 if you include my own, you're supposed to look at all the informed consents. Like on the report, each monitoring visit you have asks, there's a specific section, were there any new informed consents since your last visit, right? That includes amendments, amended ICFs, and that includes new subjects getting screened. So I don't think RBM is going to replace informed consent verification, 100% of that. Now, this guy asks more questions. So, Esource, okay, that's next. I am not aware whether sites in the US are using Esource, as in my country, source docs are paper-based, and if electronic source at sites is involved in feeding data into RBM dashboards in some or other way. If that is the case, it answers my question to some extent, as in a nutshell, I am concerned about accuracy of source data maintained in RBM, since EDC is not the source. Yes, so a lot there, a lot in your question. most sites in the US use PaperSource still. There is a push for Esource. Most sites that I know and network with, including my own, prefer PaperSource. I'm not going to get into why. They just do. Different reasons. Most people don't like change. So if they're doing something, they just rather do it that way, right? Sponsor and CROs prefer sites to use electronic source because, for the exact reasons you pointed out, they can monitor it easier. You don't even need to go to the site to look at the source, right? You don't need to scan and upload docs. It's time stamped. You know exactly when something was done. That's the C in Alcoa, contemporaneous. You don't need to worry about backdating with electronic source. You don't need to worry about forgetting to put a time stamp. Everything's time stamped to the millisecond on eSource. Sponsors and CROs love this. The only reason why they haven't fully adopted it yet is because there's a lot of resistance from the sites as to using eSource. The sites that do like eSource, interestingly enough, are the big academic institutions where it just makes their jobs a lot easier because these are big departments and they have like 50 people on the delegation log. And rather than walking the source docs to 40 different people for a visit, or 20, whatever, everyone can log in and do their part without anyone moving papers around. It's in the eSource, it's in the cloud. So those kind of institutions, they do like eSource. The sites, the traditional sites like mine, and the ones I network with primarily, are going to use PaperSource until they are forced to use eSource, and then they will have to use eSource. And then the informed consent eSource, right? There's the push for e-informed consents where they have a camera. There and there's different ways to do the e-consent, but there's ways to track how much time was spent on each page for the subject. There's even ways to do some creepy surveillance, like have a video recorder there, have an audio recorder there, something to show that that the site is following its own process of consent, right? So that's gonna all factor into making the CRA's job easier and justify paying them less for it, right? There's another question. This person's really good. You're not a newbie, okay? One of your CRAs told you. So this was the one that inspired episode 169, and she's not my CRA. She's a potential client that reached out. She is a CRA for a big CRO and wants to open a site. Okay. She told me that her job is fragmented into 4 to 5 different roles. Yes. And she's the one who actually travels to the site to review source data. And she also told me she's the one who trains these newbies on how to do a site visit also. And she's frustrated because they don't know what they're doing. Because they bring in inexperienced people, throw them in a 1 week training session course, which is nowhere near enough. My CRA Academy's 3 months plus an internship, and I still don't think it's enough. I think there's a 2 year learning curve to be a CRA. Um, so that just adds to this person's frustrations. So let's get to the question. Review. Okay, 4 to 5 different roles, and she's the one who actually travels to the site to review the source data per risk-based monitoring algorithm instructions, while others are reviewing data in the system. So just would like to know what exactly these other people are reviewing sitting in an office, because as a data manager, we also review data end to end logically per protocol, EDC versus vendor. Only thing is we do not have access to the source docs, and whenever we do not get a satisfactory answer from the site, we contact site CRAs to resolve the issue. So I'm not sure what these people do. I think the 4 or 5 people that she was referencing, I think 1 or 2 of them have something to do with data management, right? Like I know there's in-house CRAs that assist the CRA. I know there's assistants, and then there's people with data management, and there's project manager who has assistants as well. So it has to do with data management, probably has to do with queries, probably has to do with discrepancies amongst different vendors, and I don't know. I don't know, but maybe someone out there knows and can leave a comment here. And that's it. Thank you all. This is an extremely important topic. Um, I'm not an alarmist. I don't think anyone in this industry has anything to worry about. I think, if anything, we're in one of the safest industries for all the reasons why we sometimes get frustrated with this industry because of the lack of innovation. And like with patient recruitment, I just get frustrated. I mean, it took IRBs until 2 years ago to realize that social media advertising is actually on par. It's better, but they treat it equally as traditional media, which is it's a ridiculous notion. Every other industry has accepted the fact that social media is far superior to traditional media. But IRBs, they didn't know how to treat social media. And there's just plenty of examples like this where like there's just so slow to adapt, right, to technologies. And I think it's a double-edged sword because yeah, that may be frustrating, but at the same time, job security. So you're able to see other industries, what's going on, which technologies are disrupting what's AI doing here, what's algorithms doing there, what's big data doing there. And you're able to use your logic and translate it to your role and ask yourself, can you be replaced by any of these technologies? Right? And the good news in our industry is you have a long runway to figure that out. It's not going to happen overnight. You're going to have a decade to figure this out. So, great industry to be in. Don't be afraid of change. The one thing that is constant in life is that it changes and it doesn't stay the same. My job in 2018 is very different from my job in 2005. I imagine that my job in 2028 will be very different from my job today. So don't be worried. It's a great industry. Thank you very much. Let me know your comments, concerns, feedback. Educate me on some of the stuff where maybe I'm unclear or answered something incorrectly, or you have some extra context to give me and some extra color to give me. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Catch y'all later. Bye bye.